Eternal light warmly greets you, wishing you a peaceful day filled with the radiant light of God. If what you're about to hear feels true and touches your heart, please leave a comment, share this message, and continue walking with us on the journey toward the light that never fades. I once walked through the heart of the city, on a windy street lit by dazzling lights. Yet inside me blew a colder wind, a chill not from winter, but from within, from a chest where the heart no longer felt anything but a vague emptiness. I had everything: prestigious degrees, a position many strive for their whole lives, firm handshakes, polite smiles at crowded banquets. But strangely, amidst all this abundance, I felt like someone gasping for air, breathing but not alive, walking but with no idea where I was going. That feeling, I believe, is not mine alone. Countless others wake up each morning in a well-furnished room, pick up their phones, scroll through hundreds of faces, yet still feel like they're left behind in a desert. No one, no voice, and above all, no meaning. We live in an era where everything seems to fit in the palm of our hand. Technology, information, convenience, the whole world with just a tap. But why is the human heart increasingly empty? Why does connection lead to deeper loneliness? How can we talk all day online, yet not know how to speak one honest word to ourselves? I can't help but think of a man named Solomon, the most glorious king in Israel's history, the one called the wisest man of all time. He had it all: power, wealth, fame, beautiful wives, music and dancing day and night in a palace overlaid with gold. Yet in Ecclesiastes he cried out in despair, "Meaningless, utterly meaningless. Everything is meaningless." Ecclesiastes 1:2. These words did not come from the mouth of a failure, but from one the world would call perfectly successful. That shook me. Could it be that the higher one climbs, the more empty it feels, realizing there's nothing waiting at the summit? Loneliness. It's not just the absence of people, but the absence of a soul who understands us, touches us, and holds us through life's storms. You may have hundreds of followers, thousands of likes, and still not one person who truly knows who you are. We are torn apart by countless roles: the model employee, the strict father, the selfless wife, the cheerful friend, and in the end, even we no longer know which face is our own. And in that tangled maze of identities, the soul begins to whisper in silence, "Who am I, and what was I made for?" In moments of such despair, I lost faith in human wisdom. I turned to literature, philosophy, psychology, and even silence. But only when I read the Bible did I hear a strange whisper. Not advice or logic, but an invitation. "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." Matthew 11:28. That invitation wasn't flashy or clever, but it echoed like a mother calling her lost child. And I thought of Jesus, who lived 33 years on earth, never held power, never had a home to call his own, not a coin in his pocket. Yet in him was a fullness no one could deny. He, in the darkest night at Gethsemane, when friends abandoned him, when betrayal knocked, still chose obedience, chose to love humanity to the end through death on a cross. In this world where we're taught that happiness comes when we have enough money, enough friends, enough fame, Jesus went the other way. He gave up everything to hold on to one thing, the Father's will. And that alone made his life complete. We chase after the conditions of life, forgetting that the source of life does not come from possessions or status, but from connection with the one who created us. Could it be that loneliness is a sign that our soul longs for something beyond this world? Could emptiness be the whisper that it's time to return, not to a religion or rigid doctrine, but to a relationship where we no longer perform, no longer need to prove anything, just show up, vulnerable and loved? I think of Job, who lost everything: children, wealth, health. In his agony, he cursed the day he was born. But in the end, he didn't regain everything as a reward for endurance. He found God, not through rumors or books, but "my eyes have seen you," Job 42:5. And only in meeting the Creator did his suffering gain meaning. Loneliness was no longer the enemy. It became the doorway to encounter. Perhaps what people lack most today is not time, money, or friends, but a true encounter with the one who shaped their soul. For no one knows us like the one who formed us from dust. No one can fill the inner void like the one who breathed life into our lungs. And no one can lift us from the pit of loneliness with a nail-pierced hand. If you feel empty, Even while living among things others only dream of, please don't blame yourself or society. It might be a sign that your soul is starving and you fed it the wrong food. You may be experiencing a spiritual hunger and trying to satisfy it with physical means. But as Jesus said, man shall not live on bread alone, but on every word that comes from the mouth of God. Eternal light does not come to offer you another philosophy or doctrine. We simply hope that in a moment of pause, amid daily noise, you might hear God calling your name, gently but earnestly. Because you were not born to be alone. You were born to be loved. And that love doesn't fade, doesn't withdraw when you fail. It once bore a cross, walked the most painful road, just to say, I am here. I'm still waiting for you to come home. Have you ever heard that call? Part 1. The Silent Presence of God. I used to think that if God wanted to speak to humanity, he would use a majestic, glorious, thunderous voice. Then I gradually came to understand that he doesn't need to shout to be noticed. He is silent, and it is in that silence that the entire universe trembles. We do not hear him, not because he is not speaking, but because the noise of life has filled every crevice of our soul. I observe the modern world like someone watching a fever, each person busy with a device in hand, eyes glued to screens as if searching for life there. As if love, comfort, and purpose were all neatly packed into a few digital icons. But they don't realize that what they are seeking is the presence of God, and they are searching in a place that cannot contain him. Distraction, hurry, fragmentation. I once read in the book of Kings that God was not in the strong wind, not in the earthquake, not in the fire, but in a gentle whisper. 1 Kings 19:11-12. The story of the prophet Elijah is a beautiful haunting. He fled afraid, withdrew into the wilderness, and there, in exhaustion and despair, God appeared, not as a force of power, but as a fragile silence. That is the subtle lesson modern humans have forgotten. God does not barge in, he does not knock with a hammer, he stands outside and gently taps. We live in an age where being busy has become a measure of human worth. The busier one is, the more successful they are deemed to be. But success in what? In escaping one's own inner life? In not having a single moment to ask, who am I in the eyes of God? There is no room for God in a soul that constantly has 15 browser tabs open, always plays background music to avoid facing silence. We are too busy to be lonely, and thus loneliness runs even deeper. It was in the moments when I was forced to stop, when sick, in grief, when there was nowhere left to run, that I began to hear something different. It wasn't a voice, but an awareness, as if someone was sitting beside me, waiting for me to turn around. The first time I truly prayed was without words, only tears. And I understood that God had been there all along. I just had never been still long enough to notice. One day I returned to my hometown, where there was no phone signal, no Wi-Fi, nothing modern to distract me. I took a walk in the woods, and in that simple moment, under the canopy of trees, with sunlight streaming through the leaves, I suddenly felt seen. Not with physical eyes, but a seeing from the other side of the soul. I couldn't explain it, but I knew for certain he was looking at me, not judging, not demanding, just seeing. I think of Jesus. Throughout his life, how many times did he withdraw to lonely places to pray? Not to escape, but to reconnect with the Father. Even in his agony at Golgotha, he still cried out, my God, why have you forsaken me?" A question not of accusation, but the painful echo of a temporary separation, so that we in our own loneliness might recognize God too has been lonely. So then, if he, the one who made the universe, also chose silence, also chose solitude to pray, why are we so afraid of quiet? Is it because in silence, there is nothing left to cling to but ourselves? And in that emptiness, God appears like a mirror we cannot ignore. I have lived long enough to understand that the presence of God does not come like lightning, but like dew settling on a leaf at dawn, so light that if we do not pause and bow down, we will never see it. He is the light at the tip of a mother's finger touching her child's fevered forehead. He is the unspoken forgiveness in a father's eyes after an argument. He is the fragile heartbeat in pain, the moment when time stops, not because of something grand, but because of a perfect silence. That is why I want to invite you, no, not by force, but as a companion, to claim for yourself a moment of emptiness, even just 5 or 10 minutes a day. Unplug everything. Turn off your phone. Turn off the sound. Sit, breathe. Don't think. Don't pray with words. Don't expect a miracle. Just be present. For in that presence, God is already there. I think of Mary when the angel Gabriel appeared. It wasn't in a crowd, not during a festival. It was in a small room, a quiet young woman, unknown to the world. And yet in that silence and obscurity, the word became flesh. Silence does not kill God's calling. On the contrary, it is the only place where it can ring most clearly. In an age where everyone is speaking, calling, performing, shouting, silence becomes a revolutionary act, an act of restoring the ability to listen, not just to human voices, but to the voice of God. And like Elijah, like Mary, like Jesus himself, you will realize God is not far. He is right here in this silence, looking at you, waiting for you to recognize him. Part 2. The consequences of ignoring God. There are nights when I awaken in a room without a sound, and that stillness, rather than comforting me, carries the shape of an abyss. I cannot move, not because my body is paralyzed, but because my soul is weighed down by a question that seems harmless. Do you even know who God is anymore? And in that moment I understood. The most terrifying thing is not that God is hidden, but that we have lived so long without knowing who he is. People believe they can live without God. They call it freedom. They build a closed world where God is not invited, as if he is a nuisance in the modern dream. But like someone living in a windowless building, they soon realize that the light, the substitute they thought they could replace with artificial bulbs, is no longer enough to warm the soul. And then they feel cold. Not the cold of the flesh, but the cold at the deepest place, the place only God can touch. I was once one of them. For a long time, I lived as though I were the center of the universe, where everything must revolve around the logic I deemed reasonable. I replaced prayer with argument, faith with doubt. But instead of being liberated, I was trapped. Each time I looked in the mirror, I saw a speaking, thinking mannequin, but missing something essential. Without God, the soul is just an empty room in which every echo returns to itself. I think of Judas Iscariot, who walked with Jesus, ate with him, witnessed miracles, yet betrayed him with a kiss. What could be more tragic than standing close to the source of life and choosing distance? Having ignored the light, Judas was swallowed wholly by darkness. The frightening thing was not punishment, but the complete absence of hope. When God is no longer present, people do not die by the lash, they die by losing their way. I recall an old friend. He was once a believer, gentle and compassionate. But life's blows shattered his dreams, and he turned his back on God, as though God were responsible for his pain. He said he would rebuild himself from the ruins. Yet 5 years later, when I met him again, his eyes had lost their light. His smile was no longer genuine. He had succeeded and grown wealthy, but something inside him had died. When I asked, "Are you happy?" he smiled, and in that smile, I heard the sound of breaking. He said, "I don't know anymore." We ignore God not by denying him, but by living as though he does not matter. We still attend church, still read a few Bible verses, but we do not let them touch our hearts. Like Pharaoh, when Moses came with God's word, he heard but did not listen, he saw but did not perceive. A heart hardened does not need to shout its denial of God. It merely needs to be silent and look away. And what happens then? A sensation I call the void of the soul. We are still alive, still breathing, but everything becomes meaningless. Joy grows fleeting, sorrow everlasting. We become prisoners of the temporary, success, status, even relationships, all insufficient to fill that void. For only one thing can fill it, the presence of God. But God does not force himself on us. He waits. Like the father in the parable of the prodigal son, he lets the child depart, squander his inheritance in passion and despair. And only when there is nothing left, no friends, no bread, no pride, does the child remember. In the Father's house, even the servant lives better. I once thought returning to God was an insult to reason, but I was wrong. It is the most sober act a person can undertake, for only in his light do I see my true form, not as a wretch, nor as a petty God, but as a child who has forgotten the voice of his father. I recall a woman I once met at a prayer gathering. She had been a successful doctor with everything the world dreams of. Yet her husband died suddenly, her only son fell into addiction, and she, desperate to save everything, lost the will to live. She told me she had attempted to end her life several times, but one night, after crying herself dry, she heard a Bible verse echoing in her mind. "I will never leave you nor forsake you." Hebrews 13, verse 5. No one had read it to her, no one had explained it, but she heard it, and she clung to it like a drowning person grasping a straw. Now she is no longer a doctor, no longer has a career, but she possesses something no one can take away: vibrant faith in God. She helps others rediscover life's meaning. She does not preach or pontificate, she simply lives. And in that life, His presence radiates like a silent fragrance. I believe that when we ignore God, the first thing we lose is not morality, but meaning. Without meaning, we will do anything or nothing at all. And as Solomon wrote after living a life apart from God, "Vanity of vanities, all is vanity." Ecclesiastes 1:2. He did not speak those words as a pauper, but when he had everything: wealth, wisdom, women, glory. Yet all of it without God was smoke. I have learned that God is not one choice among many for living. He is the root. Lose Him, and we do not just lose a part of our spirit, we lose our entire frame of reference. And when we are lost, we do not stop. We keep walking, but in darkness. And that darkness, if traveled too far, will consume the soul. So today, if you feel empty, if every effort to live only exhausts you further, if you have tried everything and still feel cold inside, perhaps there is only one thing you haven't tried: returning to God. He is not far away. He does not demand your perfection. He does not ask what you have done. He only asks, do you still want to come home? And if your answer is yes, know this: He has been running to meet you for a long time. Part 3. Concrete Stories. In a world where walls seem to grow up around the soul, where even the wind hesitates, old stories do not die. They breathe, they moan, and they tap gently on the chests of those who still keep a little ear to listen. They are no longer mere legends or religion. They are a silent mirror in which darkness and light coexist, and humanity, small and trembling, must still decide. Not between right and wrong, but between God and utter isolation. Jonah, a name that sounds simple, yet within me it rings like a bell, forcing me to face myself. No one can flee from God. This I once thought a beautiful image, a metaphor. But no, it is a sentence. For every time we turn our backs on Him, we do not depart from a deity, but fall into nothingness. Jonah, the prophet called, but who refused. Not because he doubted God, but because he feared God's plan. I understand that fear. I have feared forgiving, loving, living as though there were a purpose beyond myself. Like Jonah, I boarded a ship, chose the opposite course. But the sea did not remain calm. God did not abandon me. He sent a storm. And the storm did not come to kill, but to awaken a sleeping soul. When Jonah was cast overboard, swallowed by the great fish, I saw an image both horrifying and tender. A man utterly isolated, no light, no space, no voice. Only the invisible presence of God in that dark belly. I have been inside that fish, not in the literal sense, but in a spiritual one. There, all excuses fell away. Nothing remained to cling to. No mask could hide the real fear. I have rejected the one who formed me. Yet right there where despair reached its peak, something strange happened. God did not scold. He listened. And Jonah, like an exhausted child, uttered a prayer. Not grand, not eloquent, but a confession of the heart. And God answered with life. I realized the issue is not in fleeing. Who among us has never fled? The issue is, are we willing to pray in the fish's belly? Are we willing to let Him draw us back, not with glory, but with mercy? From Jonah, I turned to Saul, the one chosen as the first king of Israel, a beginning anointed with oil, full of promise. But his fall came not because he was evil, but because he did not believe that God alone was enough. What could be more fearful than a man anointed who loses himself for fear of losing power? Saul spared the best of the spoils against God's command. He thought perhaps he knew better than God. There I saw myself. Each time I compromise, each time I offer half obedience to keep half my own way. But half obedience in God's eyes is rebellion. I picture Saul on his final night, sitting alone in his tent, darkness swallowing his thoughts, not a single prayer rising. He had heard God's voice once, but now only silence. He had once seen God's guidance, but now only the ghost of his own poor choices. Saul's death was not tragic because he fell on the battlefield, but because he had died long ago in his heart, the moment he stopped trusting God's mercy. People often ask, why did God let Saul fail? But I think he warned him. He was patient. Yet the human heart, when it crowns itself king, leaves no room for God to reign. Turning to Martha and Mary, I find something different. Not rebellion, not flight, not pride, but busyness, a gentler trap, more insidious, equally deadly. Martha's service, a commendable act, yet she grew irritated that Mary sat listening to the Lord. In Martha's eyes, righteousness was tied to work. In the Lord's eyes, the best portion is listening. Mary chose the better part, not because she despised service, but because she recognized who stood before her. I have been Martha. I spent a lifetime working, serving in the church, speaking of God, writing about God, but never sitting with God. I used busyness to avoid silence, where I would face the hollowness in my soul. I was afraid of his gaze, but God does not want me busy for him. He wants me present with him. In my study, among theological tomes, sits a chair I rarely use, the prayer chair. I dusted it off just yesterday. I sat down asking nothing, simply to be there. And in that fragile silence, I heard something not with my ears, but from the depths of my being. You are mine. I have never wept so much. There was a man I once knew. I called him David, not because he resembled King David, but because he too had fallen and risen. A modern man, educated, wealthy, a former CEO of a tech firm, but then his marriage collapsed. His son committed suicide and he crumbled. He walked away from faith, not in words, but by living as though he no longer needed God. One day he wandered into the woods, not searching for anything, merely out of weariness. He tripped, sat down, and looked up. A small bird sang in the branches. Nothing extraordinary, except that he suddenly wept. In that instant, he felt seen. Not by the bird, not by another person, but by an unseen gaze. He whispered, "If you are there, speak." And he spoke, not in sound, but in peace. A peace that cannot be explained, that transcends reason, yet fills completely. From that moment, he returned to the Lord, not in a building, but in his broken life. He began to pray. He did not rebuild his company nor reclaim his fame, but he found his soul again. I asked him, "Do you believe God was with you all that time?" He replied, "I can't be sure, but I believe I was never abandoned." And that is the truth. Whether you are Jonah, fleeing, Saul, stubborn, Martha, busy, or David, broken, God is still calling you, not with thunder, but with a whisper. Not by command, but by presence. He does not need you perfect. He needs you returned. We, the ones torn by sin, by doubt, by emptiness and expectation, do not have to build a stairway to heaven. We only need to say, "Lord, be with me." And when that small trembling word rises, one thing happens. Light seeps in. Not dazzling, but enough to show the way home. Part 4. How to stop ignoring God. In a world where everything can be measured, analyzed, and optimized, the presence of God seems to fade into the background, like a distant dream in the minds of modern humans. We live in an era where the noise of technology and constant busyness has drowned out the gentle yet profound call of the Almighty. However, God has never left. We have learned how to ignore him. So, how can we stop ignoring God and reestablish a deep relationship with him? Practice silence, seeking God's presence in stillness. Silence is not just the absence of sound, but a state of the soul where we can hear the voice of God. In the Bible, the prophet Elijah did not hear God's voice in the storm or earthquake, but in a gentle whisper, 1 Kings 19 verse 12. This shows that God often speaks to us in stillness, when our hearts are at peace and ready to listen. To practice silence, start by setting aside a time each day, even if it's just 5 minutes, to sit in silence before God. Choose a quiet place, away from the distractions of daily life. Focus on your breath, feeling each inhale and exhale as a wordless prayer. During this time, let your soul open up, ready to receive God's presence. Read the Bible, connecting with God through his word. The Bible is the living word of God, a bridge between us and him. By reading and reflecting on the Bible, we not only gain a deeper understanding of God's nature and will, but also experience transformation in our hearts. As the author of Hebrews wrote, "For the word of God is living and active, sharper than any two-edged sword." Hebrews 4:12. Start by selecting a passage from the Bible each day, reading it slowly, and reflecting on its meaning in your life. Ask yourself, what is God saying to me through this passage? How can I apply this teaching in my daily life? Writing down your thoughts and feelings can also help you gain a deeper understanding and maintain a close connection with God's Word. Prayer, honest communication with God. Prayer is not just a matter of speaking requests, but an honest conversation with God. It is the moment we open our hearts, sharing our joys, sorrows, worries, and hopes with the Creator. In the Gospel of Matthew, Jesus taught us how to pray. Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Matthew 6:9-13, a simple yet profound prayer that expresses trust and complete surrender to God. To pray effectively, find a quiet time and place where you can focus entirely on your conversation with God. Start by thanking Him for the blessings you've received. Then share what you are going through, your difficulties, concerns, and finally listen. Sometimes, God responds not through words, but through the peace in our hearts, through a sense of being loved and accepted unconditionally. Faith community, journeying together in faith. We are not meant to walk the road of faith alone. A faith community is where we find support, encouragement, and guidance. In community, we learn from one another, share experiences, and grow together in faith. As Paul wrote, "For just as the body is one and has many members, so it is with Christ." 1 Corinthians 12:12. Seek out a faith community where you feel accepted and loved. Join small groups, Bible studies, prayer meetings, and serve together. In community, we not only receive support, but also have the opportunity to serve others, expressing God's love through concrete acts. Conclusion: returning to God. Stopping the habit of ignoring God is not a one-time act, but a continuous journey that demands patience and commitment. By practicing silence, reading the Bible, praying honestly, and engaging in a faith community, we gradually open our hearts to receive God's presence in our daily lives. On this journey, we are not alone. God is always with us, waiting for us to return to Him with unconditional love. Final section. There are days when I wake with a dense silence filling my soul, as if the world has been sealed in an old wooden chest whose key no one holds. In that stillness, I hear no voice of man, no song of birds, nor see a single ray of light piercing the cracks of existence. Yet strangely, it is in that very quiet that I hear a call, not by sound, but by sense, a whisper beyond language, as though God places an invisible hand on my shoulder and asks, "How long will you wander?" And I think perhaps we are all the same. We are all fugitives. Jonah, Saul, Martha, you and me. We live behind walls we ourselves have built, afraid of God's call because we know that if we truly listen, we cannot go on as before. We must change. The old self must die. We must admit that we have ignored, turned away from, refused Him countless times. Sometimes with silence, sometimes with an unconscious smile in a meaningless meeting, sometimes by postponing what we should have done today. Once I reread Jonah's story, not as an ancient Bible passage, but as a haunting mirror. Jonah is no stranger. Jonah is me, the one who heard God's voice yet chose the opposite path because I thought I knew better. But I only ran straight into the whale's belly, the dense darkness of isolation, where there was nothing left but the pangs of a broken heart and the stench of a soul decaying. There, God did not punish me. He waited for me. He did not knock with anger. He simply waited for me to open the door from within, even just a crack. The question is, how much longer will we stay closed? How much longer before we relinquish control of our lives so that He can master them? I once thought listening to God was for others, saints, priests, nuns, those not trapped by deadlines, anxieties, or the emptiness behind a screen. But no, Jonah was not holy when he heard God. Saul was not foolish when he strayed. And Martha was not wrong to be busy. They were all human. Like me, like you. So perhaps you now ask, how do I hear Him? But you need not listen with your ears, but with the deep longing you have buried. You have yearned to live authentically, right? To be loved unconditionally? To see light not just with your eyes, but with your soul? That call does not come from Google, nor from this writing, nor from my words, but from where you have always known, from God. Stop. Let every noise fall away like autumn leaves. Sit down, close your eyes, tell God you are ready. No need for polished words. Just say, "Lord, I have ignored you long enough. Please welcome me home." And you will be amazed that His silence is fuller than any symphony. I have seen too many living dead, and I once was one of them. But when I was most exhausted, I fell not before the world, but before God. And he said nothing except through a gentle presence, like a warm blanket wrapped around my frozen soul. If you are reading these lines, it is no accident. It is an invitation. Therefore, I invite you, not as a preacher, but as a fellow wanderer who has been found, begin your journey. Return to the one who has patiently awaited you. Clean the dusty corners of your heart and invite him in. Do not wait until you are worthy. Jonah was not worthy. Saul failed. Martha was overwhelmed. Yet God did not reject them. Now I invite you to pray with me. You need not stand, nor know exactly what to say. Just be yourself. I will pray on your behalf if you do not know where to start. A prayer. Our Father in heaven, I have wandered far from you too long. I have built walls of doubt, fear, and pride around me. I have filled my time with meaningless things and forgotten you in the shadows. But today I no longer want to ignore you. I open my heart, not because I am worthy, but because I am weary. Please come in. Shine your light on the dark places of my soul. Let me hear your call again, the call that has echoed from creation's dawn to this very moment, waiting for me to respond. I cannot promise I will never stumble, but I dare ask you to lift me up whenever I fall. I cannot be certain I will always obey you, but I dare pray you will never leave me. Father, today I come home. I am the prodigal, the Jonah in the fish, the Saul on the Damascus road, yet I am also the child you embrace. No judgment, no punishment, only love. Amen. Thank you for journeying with eternal light through these reflections, an invitation into the depths of spirit, truth, and God's light. We are not perfect, but we believe in one who is, and he is waiting for you. Until we meet again in our next sharing, may the eternal light shine upon your path.